Stop the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello. Our conversation this evening comes from Sarah Harrison, the novelist, Dr. Michael O'Donnell, physician and writer, Benny Green, who does most things, and Laurie Taylor, professor of sociology at York University. We have music from Instant Sunshine. Well, as to hobbies now, we were talking about hobbies, the Jenningses, Norma and Norman of Brentwood, write to complain of what they claim was the insulting way we talked about them, about the hobbies. But Mrs. Jennings, Norma, intent as she was on lambasting us, throws in the most intriguing aside. Her husband, Norman, is thoroughly fulfilled by his hobby, which is playing the cinema organ. But where, how, at what hours, and, of course, vitally, does it, you know, rise up? Perhaps Mrs. Jennings knew it was punishment indeed to leave us tantalised. Well, to other things, it was like a rerun, wasn't it, of that celebrated case when Mr. Honeyweather Gooseboot and Mr. Tinkleberry Snapdriver appeared before Mr. Justice Cocklecarrot in the case of the 12 red-bearded dwarfs. Names such as Scorpion de Roof Trouser and Glum's Gillygottle did not actually surface, but only, you more than once felt, because the customers were going under aliases. True Cocklecarrotian confusion was induced when we learned that the venue was known as the House of 1001 Delights, and immediately assumed it to be a Chinese restaurant. But the statement that the lady in question was, quote, a woman of very few vices, and the information that she was sustained, while the jury was considering its verdict, by a supply of tomato sandwiches, had that special flat-footedness that was Beachcomber's own hallmark, and convinced me the lady's real name was Mrs. McGurgle. Now, what else was worthy of the great man?
Well, I'm sure there was a sensation in court when Mr. Tinkleberry Snapdriver produced his second police constable, not the one who wore eye makeup and a monocle, but the one who recalled his encounters with the ladies of the night, who included an elderly gentleman who said his name was Amanda, the sultry Agatha, who worked in a haberdasher's and specialised in administering good hidings, and Annie, a tattooed lady from Leamington Spa. And I'm sure that Mr. Justice Cocklecarrot granted him a mandatum sui generis.
Yes, mandatum scandalum, because the tattooing, as Mr. Honeyweather Gooseboot no doubt pointed out, was not only at the front, it was at the back as well. And the ladies came from Leamington Spa. It should never be forgotten.
He would have published all this in the Egg Supplement, I think. This all belongs in the Egg Supplement. But the most amazing thing was that the lady's good character was being spoken about in court. And one of the great things they said in favour of her morals was that she had no mortgage responsibility. Now, that really is bizarre, because that makes the whole country sex pots.
Yes, I really haven't got... I would like to report in more detail on this, because obviously, as a sociologist, I actually popped along in a blue taffeta dress with a small tiara and matching slingback shoes, and my tape recorder disguised as a thumbscrew, but unfortunately I had to make an excuse and leave and say that I was impotent after a long journey, so I've got nothing...
No, you had nothing really material to add. I thought that truly Beachcomberian was the supply, I've written this down because you have to get it right, the supply of Egyptian writing paper obtained by a policeman from his uncle in that country, so that a correspondence could be initiated from Cairo. Mr. Tollington, don't let us ever forget that Beachcomber was very good at devising dull names. Mr. Tollington sent £20 in Egyptian currency wrapped in carbon paper by way of a present, but unfortunately it was stolen by Arab mailmen. Beachcombers, how could he better it?
The funniest thing, I thought, it said 31 policemen broke into the house.
Yeah, 400 horses up chimney.
Yes.
The story to meet this headline has yet to be found.
I was delighted by the fact that all the celebrities like Terry Jones and Elkin Allen were clustered at the bottom of the stairs. That seems to be the appropriate place for the entertainers. And I also want to enter a word of blame for Safeways. It does seem to me they've got a lot to answer for. I mean, when I was in the provinces, I always shopped at Tesco's, and I've noticed that I've become distinctly more sprightly since shopping at Safeways in London. I'd put a lot more down to that. That's where, of course, she does shop.
Actually, I noticed that the lady left a jar of Snibbo on her dressing table for the use of the guests.
Yes,
But
yes.
no brace rot. Now, brace rot would be the perfect thing at one of her
And
parties.
maybe,
because it
before-
makes men's trousers fall
Of
down.
course, and before anything actually took place, of course, everyone would adjust their thread goals, thorough grip, garter. I'd like to think so, anyway.
But did you notice, as the case went on, that Beachcomber took a firmer grip on all the reporters? Here, I've just added a name to this, but this actually came out of one newspaper. "Forgive me for asking, but did you yourself go upstairs with any man?" asked Mr. Snapdriver. The defendant looked into space. "No," she said quietly, "I was too busy making the sandwiches." She later left the court, fixing her scarf and tossing her head.
Exactly. Now, you see, that is exactly the chatelaine of Marine House, Mrs. McGurgle. And it was surely Mrs. McGurgle who wrote that affecting Beachcomberian notice, "No fornicating in the bathroom," prior to going downstairs and measuring out the marmalade for tomorrow's breakfast.
And
don't you think so?
And
Yes,
of course,
indeed.
it was signed Madame Bologna, that particular note. Oh, yes, it was signed Madame Bologna. Just the only little sort of Beachcomber thing that you haven't mentioned was I think you did catch once talking about the success of Lady Cab Stanley's party last night was largely due to her imitation of the Swiss idea of making your guests entertain you. And the particular thing there, which just seemed as though it could have been going on in Ambleside, was in the middle of supper, Captain Screaming, to everyone's amusement, balanced a fork on the tip of his right ear, at the same time playing a ukulele with his heels. One wouldn't have been surprised.
And also, the lady in question, Mrs. McGurgle, was said to be fairly substantial, but then, of course, Lady Cab Stanley was, and one of the most exquisite sort of greetings we know of is Lady Cab Stanley walking down Ludgate Hill, and two gentlemen said, "Hello, St. Paul's is on the move again." Anyway, that'll have to do. The purest gentility distinguishes the whole thing, I think. But now, here's a question. I feel a bit odd about this one. When I heard, changing the subject totally, when I heard the home cricket team had won the World Series Cup, I thought, what am I doing feeling nostalgic for the game as it used to be played, when at that time I not only took no interest in it, I found it actively boring. Whence this nostalgia for cricket as played by names that I knew of, but I never saw them, names like Bradman and Verity and Larwood. Well, yes, of the present game, the Space Invader gear, the horrible helmets and coloured trousers that they play cricket in now, are very unattractive, but that wouldn't make me hanker after a sort of cricket I never watched. So I think it's a bit of an irony to have got myself round to the idea of cricket, only to find that it's vanished from the face of the earth. Now, you can have something to say about this, Benny, I'm sure, because you're a great cricket man.
I think that you've been sold an illusion. I don't think that the game years ago was all that gentle and polite and pleasant as it's supposed to have been. The worst excesses were in 1932-3, when the England behaviour in Australia was so ridiculous on the field of play that there were notes exchanged between the Australian and British parliaments. And there were rumours that Australia was going to secede from empire. And the colonial secretary had to get in touch with the Australian Prime Minister and smooth it over. That was because the England bowlers behaved in 1932-3 like the West Indian bowlers have been behaving in the last couple of years.
That'll bring you letters from all sides.
So you
invented-
can't really diagnose what I'm suffering from if suffering from
No,
it.
I think you're suffering from cricket literature.
I'm
I'm
you
sure.
may well be right.
Yes, I'm sure.
Oh, my Hornby and my Barlow.
That's right.
Yes.
Long
Yeah,
ago.
yes.
That's one thing also, but I think it's wrong to say that cricket is actually watched by anybody except on television. The cricket that you feel nostalgic for is essentially a backdrop, and real cricket is still a backdrop. Once a year I go to Lord's with an elderly friend and we watch a day of whatever test match is on, and the test match goes on very far away, in the distance, in the background, and people talk and then they say, "By Jove, was he out?" and they turn quickly. I believe also in Australia they actually have an action replay screen in the pitch, so nobody can even enjoy that sort of feeling of leisure. But cricket is a backdrop to other things going on. I mean, empires fall while games are played. God knows it takes long enough. And it's a summer backdrop. It's an idea we have about cricket. People only watch cricket when it's eaten up and processed and regurgitated by television.
No, it can be a backdrop, but lots of people like me go there to watch the game. I think Michael's bursting.
No, I'm not bursting. But I watch cricket almost incidentally when I walk past the cricket green, and that does produce in me the effect that Bob felt that he once got from somewhere or other. But you're really talking about images. I was aware the only sport in which I actively engage at the moment is walking, which I enjoy enormously. And last autumn, I was walking along by a river, and the leaves were falling, and it's a warm, sunny day, and that image evoked for me an image of war. It was extraordinarily paradoxical that this image of peace brought up memories of war. It was wartime, the Battle of Britain. I looked up into the sky for vapour trails. I was surrounded by memories of, fathers and elder brothers going off to kill people. And then I was surrounded by birds singing. Now, that image, like you, I began to, where does that image, did it come from the cinema, or was it boyhood memories? They've all got coalesced somewhere in the background.
I think what Benny said, I was very pleased that he said that, because about you suffering from cricket literature, because in the 1950s, I can remember that I was a cricket supporter, but in the 1950s there was a great outcry about how dull cricket was. I mean, something like 50% of the games that were being played in this country were draws, and people kept saying, let's have brighter cricket, let's make cricket more successful. And certainly cricket has been made more successful, in some cases by some of the things that you're talking about. But I think that the problem is the ways in which the television creates a notion of a game, and the game has to be full of these climaxes or half climaxes all the time. That it's the pace of television, it's event following event. I mean, it's the normal pattern of television with commercials and incidents and people who write Dallas every 4 minutes producing something happening. So therefore something has to happen, and perhaps it is the essence of cricket that really you have to wait a long time for something to happen. So the stretch of our ability to, our patience.
Well, that's what I couldn't do. You see, that's why I didn't like it when I was a lad. I didn't like it. Now, I've got a friend who comes from Transylvania, and the first time he saw cricket was about 30 years ago, and the first match he saw was on television. He said absolutely everything was stationary, except for one fielder who's scratching his backside. And the commentator, he said, the tension is well-nigh unbearable. And it was this insufferable slowness that put me out of humour with it. But now the game has suddenly accelerated in the way more or less you were describing, Laurie. It's accelerated abominably, and I recognise that now that I probably have a palate for slowness, it's too late.
Well, I think, first of all, about Transylvania, the only Transylvania cricketer I ever knew had a report...
Lad the Impaler, wasn't
it? No, it was not much good as a bowler, but shows great promise as a bat.
I don't know. How am I supposed to pick a programme up and make it go on?
Let me say...
Talk hurriedly.
No, I must say that having studied cricket history with great detail, especially the last 120 years, the warfare that's gone on those polite, gentle English fields is hair-raising. It's by no means the English Arcadian idyll that has been presented in literature. But cricket literature is something very different from cricket, and it's this that I think we've been talking about. I mean, people assume that cricket was invented at Hambledon Green in the early 1700s. It wasn't at all. It was an old game by then. What they mean is that the first proper book about cricket was written about Hambledon. And that is where history begins. In actual fact, the Victorians were scoundrels. They used to come on the field with bats that were too wide, and they had to have a man sitting at the gate at Lord's with a gauge. And every time the batsman came out of bat, they had to measure the bat just in case he was cheating.
W.G. Grayson, Les Beachcomber made this up. Hid the ball under his beard and ran 307 runs.
Well, I think the Beachcomber was making it up, but Grace was even more outrageous than Beachcomber.
Yes, I don't think cricket was any more gentlemanly. I mean, the instant you were talking about, obviously, the Bodyline series, which everybody knows about. I mean, the thing about that was that the team was divided into the gentlemen and the players. The players were sent out to do the dirty work, and the players kept very quiet. I mean, Larwood took the stick, didn't he? Because he was the one who did the dirt. But, you see, in order to make cricket more watchable and speed it up for TV, what's had to happen is they've had to take village cricket and take everything that makes village cricket attractive and make it into put that into the first class game. Yes. If you look at the people who are the cricketing heroes now, they're not the gentlemen, they're the players. Now, we have at home a picture of an old boyfriend of my grandmother's who was a test cricketer in the 1920s. There he is, like a well-trained gun dog. No, sleek, neat hair, bright eyes, fresh skin, leaning forward in the slips, creased like a knife in his flannels. The absolute opposite of Ian Botham, who is the village blacksmith, striding out to score sixes and thrill the crowd.
And moreover, doesn't know his place.
Absolutely not.
I disagree with you, Sarah, because to me the attraction of village cricket in what we laughingly call the village where I live, on the village green, is seeing Mr. So-and-so who stands behind the bank counter trying to fast bowl, and actually seeing the chap who sells you carrots dropping a catch in the slip. That's the attraction of village cricket.
It's something to do with distance, because Sarah was talking before about the fact that it was all happening a long way away and you could never really see it. And at the same time, so many people prefer to listen to cricket on the radio rather than watch it on the television, because that puts it a long way away. I mean, you have to actually then see the cricket through the imagination of people like John Arlott, who are essentially storytellers, bringing you the story from long way away. So that's all to do with distance. Now, the new cricket which is being played now is all to do with close-up. It's all to do with visibility. It's all to do with sort of replays. And suddenly cricket is now there before you in this grand cinemascope.
I don't believe that will account. I don't believe that
What is
will
an
account
extraordinary-
for the absence of something that used to be called bowling. Now, bowling, well, you could even do it underarm. But now you've got a ball, and the man with it launches it like a javelin
No.
at a man in a mask who holds a bat. Oh, there's no good saying no. That's exactly what does happen.
Yes.
Now, once upon a time,
Bowlers
I don't
were
believe it's entirely can be laid at the door of literature. Once upon a time, you went to, or failed to go to cricket, feeling that you would be spared the slings and arrows of ordinary life. That's the place now to go, where the slings and arrows seem actually to be falling. And you wouldn't be a bit surprised if out from behind a black or white sight screen, a couple of blokes with machine guns didn't step.
Can I tell you that if you want to see your old image of a sleepy, quiet, peaceful game, go to any county match which isn't being televised. There's 37 people there, 35 of whom are asleep, and you can indulge at leisure in your daydreams.
I might just do that.
And if you go into a test match, you will see the ultimate contradiction. I went into the press box at Lord's last year. None of the reporters, all tapping away and chatting and talking on their microphones, will commit themselves when a wicket falls until they turn around and watch the action replay on the television set in the press room.
Yes.
One thing we haven't said about cricket yet that no one's mentioned, I think that it's the only place where the English have become thoroughly theoretical. I mean, we've been talking about cricket literature, but it's in cricket literature that you can find people writing about events of the world in a philosophical vein, which Frenchmen, for example, wouldn't care to do about the rest of the world. I mean, it's taken enormously intensity. And someone was saying that, talking about it, the necessity of the British playing it, only the Empire playing it, and why hasn't ever, why don't the French or the Italians play it? Somebody said once the French couldn't play it because if they did, they'd all want to be batsmen. And there is something about the fact that it is still the imperial game, and I think that Benny's description of now the fact that you can find any day of the week that you want to the type of organised loafing, which constitutes so much of that cricket, is still there.
No, you see, even as a boy, and this is what kept me away then, and perhaps would not now keep me away, I felt that the cricket was being played in the past tense. I thought in some curious way it was too slow to get itself into the present tense. I thought it had already happened. I thought a cricket match was a way of acting out the past tense. It's too late to repent now, but it's not too late for a song. It's called Personal Services.
I have a plumber who will service my drains, and a doctor who treats aches and pains. When I go out to dine, a wine waiter serves wine, and a hostess meets my needs when on a plane. But Cynthia leaves them all behind, providing social service of a very special kind. It's a service with a smile, personal with style. Just lift the phone and dial her number. Don't take a second glance, do not miss the chance. She'll teach your heart to dance a rumba. Fantasy takes flight with sensual delight, and hijinks through the night, no sleeping. Lace curtains tightly drawn, to secrecy we're sworn, and frolic till the dawn comes creeping. Cynthia knows how to run a party that is fanciful and arty. She's a trendsetter. Invitations only for the loveless and the lonely. Hand in your belly do, and she'll do what she must do to make you better. Such titillating sights seen through the softened lights, a judge in crimson tights and turban, housewives on the stair, gardenias in their hair, so beautiful, so bad, so suburban. Her parties never wane, exotic and urbane. She orders more champagne to bubble. Passions burning higher as Cynthia pans the fire. She'll meet your heart's desire, no trouble. It's on those days when my nerves start to fray and I'm fraught at the end of the day. I call at her address and don my fancy dress, and in a trice frustrations melt away. For Cynthia, my love's completely blind. She provides a social service of a very special kind. We'll erect a marble monument in pink for saucy Cynthia and carve our hearts in gold upon the plinth for service of a very special kind.
Well, there, the word service came into that, and also the concept. I heard a woman in Sainsbury's or somewhere clucking about service, which she seemed to think was in short supply. And, of course, it always is, since deep down in his heart, every customer is like the Frenchman you were mentioning earlier. Every customer wants to be served first. You know, they want to be batsmen, they want to be served first. But in my experience, anyone who moans about service in public is talking about deference, and deference is what anyone who gives a service doesn't want it confused with. Handing over a jar of jam with a polite smile is one thing, but deference is handing over a bit of yourself as well and feeling you're being stolen from. I don't think service is as simple as a booklet called Customer Care thinks it is. I won't bother going through it, but I mean, I had a glance at it. In an ideal world, service would mean exactly what it says, but it's not possible to free the word of its associations with servant and servility and all that meant. And anyway, serving someone, dealing directly with another person, is always going to be fraught with tension and ambiguity. I marvel that it's only lack of service people have to complain about at the checkout, not bloodshed.
I recognise a sort of service. I'm very tentative of talking about this, but as a doctor, it's a self-indulgent thing, serving other people, getting involved with other people. The reason I don't feel uneasy talking about it is that I dislike people who talk about it's a privilege to serve. I think it's, you know, it's like they're as dangerous as people who say they're members of caring professions, because I think these are accolades that should come from outside. But when I consider these days how my life is spent, I think that there are only two activities that give any meaning to life, and one is creating something, and the other one is actually getting involved, or at least it dispels the feeling of meaninglessness. And getting involved with other people. And one of the few quotations that I actually have carefully written down, because I've seen it true so often as a doctor, is one from Schweitzer, when he wrote in a letter to a group of his helpers, "I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I do know, the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who will have sought and found how to serve." Now, that sort of service has nothing to do with salesmen.
He's talking about tennis, I think.
Oh, now he's lowered the tone again. Listen, I know, but you're talking, you see, you're talking as one who was a doctor and giving this service, but in that relationship, you were always on top, if you'll forgive the expression. Oh yes, you were always on top, and in a big way.
I'm saying it's a self-indulgence. It is so rewarding. There's nothing altruistic about it. It's a marvellous thing to be able to do.
The thing is, you get an awful lot of cant from people who say, well, I don't know why there should be any stigma attached to service, and they always turn out to be people, I know you're not saying it, but people
That's why I was worried about talking about it. I'm not a caring person. I'm a self-indulgent person.
Whenever they have these people talk in that vein, they are people who, whenever they've given a service, have been fortunate enough to volunteer it. It's very different when you have to do it. A very different thing indeed.
And really with doctors, I think it's really the patients who are performing the service, because they are subscribing to the credibility of the doctor. They are reassuring him about his professional qualifications by immediately accepting his advice. I mean, the fact is, we don't immediately accept anyone else's advice. If we go in and buy a pair of trousers and the man says, these are very good indeed for you, sir, we argue. I mean, we say, well, I'm not certain, I think I'll try another pair. I mean, try it with a doctor, say, could I have another prescription? I don't fancy this one. The balance is completely the opposite way around.
When I read this pamphlet, I wondered how seriously one should take it. Let me read one sentence from it. If somebody wears a Savile Row suit, we assume they are well off. And they spell Savile wrong in the book. So how can we take the pamphlet seriously? And then I was reminded of Cynthia Payne, because it said the most important thing is to meet the needs of the customer. Now, she was tried for trying to do
She more than met their needs.
And yet she was, the police tried to punish her for it. And then it's got in this book, always smile when you pick up the phone. And I'm still trying to work that out.
Yes. I think the whole sort of awkwardness which I think we suffer from as a nation, both about serving and being served, it's a case of the harder they fall, I think. Surely no one was better than the British at administering vast armies of servants, and our whole idea of empire, of bringing the good news to other people, and at the same time feeling that we were serving them. We thought we were the absolute tops of that. We may very well have been. But now, as we're on a kind of awkward ridge from being a class-ridden society, we imagine moving into a classless society. As the middle band has got wider, we no longer have that safe feeling of certain people doing the jobs they were born to. And I mean, you know, commuter villages are packed with women who dare not sit in the garden while other women are hoovering the bedrooms because they feel that they're just, in spite of the fact that they're paying them a perfectly good wage.
Yes, and so that is the problem with the word service, as you were saying in your introduction, in a way that it is often a word by which the middle class use as a way of E.P. Thompson talked about as moralising their own inconvenience.
Yes.
And so that when something is going wrong with their lives, it can be quite a small thing, and they can't really talk about not being able to get the sink fixed or not being able to get this done. They can therefore make this a really rather more transcendental problem by talking about the difficulty of getting service, or the problems with service, or why can't people provide these services like they used to. And I don't think this book, Benny, you noticed that particular spelling mistake. It also tells you to contact the principal office at the back, spelled P-L-E.
Laurie, it also talks about something called the BBC accent. Now, that is about 3 centuries
That's
out.
yours.
Yeah, but
you have
you
the BBC.
I mean,
But they don't mean me, you
You're
see.
lumbered with it, I'm afraid. You're right there, Michael. But you see, consider the two people concerned in the service sort of transaction. One of them is always there. One of them is always there only because he or she has to be there. But the person on the other end is always changing. Each time the constant person is there, they're wondering, what will happen? The transaction to the person who is always there giving the service becomes unpredictable. Will the person who next comes along be as good at the ritual or the transaction, call it what you will, as I am if I'm always there? And it's not that people, how does one know? Perhaps 6, 7 people out of 10 do it properly. The other 3 do not. But it's the uncertainty which, if you're in a situation where you're giving the service, must chafe abominably.
The problem is that, I mean, I would like to claim that there was something apart from what Laurie has been talking about and what you've been talking about, that there is a quality, an entity, that is an involvement in other people's lives which is very rewarding. I think it's debasing it to call serving other people, but there is some way in which you can get involved in other people's lives. If we could get a name for it, we
But
could
not if you're
detach-
selling them a pound of soap.
No, well, that's because it's debased because it's also used for salesmanship. And, I mean, this dichotomy is explained. I mean, Sarah was talking about the way the British gave servants to the world almost. There's a marvellous epitaph or grave heading in the Cantonmont Cemetery at Peshawar. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Which says,
Peshawar.
"Here lies Captain Ernest Bloomfield, accidentally shot by his orderly March the 2nd, 1897. And then underneath it says, 'Well done, thou good and faithful servant.'"
There's also...
A good service, surely, like true humility, whatever sort of service it is only noticed when the person who provided it is absent. The realisation that one has received good service is something that dawns on you after the event. And then the thing, this is why that if it's too obtrusive or it comes across too forcefully at the time, some sort of spell is broken. And Peter Ustinov tells a story about being given a bath by a geisha girl, and everything's going, as you might say, swimmingly until the moment when she suddenly speaks and says, "How was the weather at Heathrow?" And suddenly he couldn't get out quickly enough, you know.
The most amazing master-servant relationship, I'd be interested to hear your comments. John Buchan had a very dedicated butler, and they were very friendly. And when Buchan died, they arranged that the butler be buried next to him, and so he was, but separated by a hedge. And I mean, that seems to me at the same time to say, thy good and faithful servant, keep thy faithful distance.
And you often ask me, don't you, Benny, why are there no more dedicated butlers around? I mean, you know, they were never prolific, but they're none now.
You were talking about the changing, Bob, requirements. I mean, the different customers coming along to the same person who was providing the service, and the ambiguity of this. But of course, it's even more ambiguous than that, because when you say that you got good service, Sarah's phrase, phrase. When you say that you've got good service, you often want different degrees of professionalism, different degrees of honesty, different degrees of integrity. I mean, often with a waiter or something like that you positively enjoy the fact that the person is playing at being a waiter. You positively enjoy the dramatized professionalism of the waiter buzzing around. But if in fact somebody tries to sell you a suit with quite that aplomb, then you'll become worried because you want a little touch of amateurism. You want a little sense of uncertainty. And indeed you like someone who actually says, I wouldn't really have that if I were you, or indicates some distance from the company. So all these people who are providing these particular services, I remember just reading someone the other day talking about the fact that they didn't like, I think it was a Portuguese lady saying that she didn't like at all giving service, going around houses and cleaning them in London, because she couldn't understand all the people who she called would you terriblies, and the would you terriblies always said, would you terribly mind cleaning the oven? And she hadn't got this particular English phraseology, the way in which guilt was attended to. So in each one of these interactions, in each of these places, we require something completely
I think
different.
what you've been saying proves what I've felt for a long time, and I haven't heard anyone say it so far, that giving a service is a talent. Not everyone is suited to it. We've all got to work, and we all give services of one sort or another, but quite a lot of us aren't very good at it, and it gets moralised, to pick up that Thompson word about it, it gets moralised into everyone feeling service is what everyone should be good at. They don't say that about jumping about in a pogo stick or playing squash or tennis or writing or all those other things. I have a feeling that service, to do it well, you really have to have a talent. And look at all the pubs that are run by people who have no talent for it, hate alcohol and hate people.
The trouble, Bob, about the people you were talking about who don't have a talent for it is that they think that the talent can be provided by a course, maybe by reading books like the one we've just got. And I was thinking when Laurie was talking, there's a marvellous example of how to deal with that sort of intrusive service, the sort of have a nice day type attitude that Benchley records, where he went to a garage once and he just wanted to get some petrol, and the chap said, wipe your windscreen, sir. And he said, no. He said, check your water? No. Check the oil? No. He said, anything else I can do? And Benchley said, just stick out your tongue. I want to seal this letter.
Yes, and we mustn't forget the highly specialised relationship between oneself and those who serve, while also having you absolutely in a position of physical helplessness. I think quite specifically of the dentist and the hairdresser. Now, it's all very well being confident and knowing what you want until the moment when the drill first buzzes or the scissors take the first snip, and then we know who has the upper hand.
But, people who have to give the service, well, it's difficult for them. People who volunteer the service, it's not at all difficult. And the boss is the top of the tree or ladder or hierarchy of those who volunteer the service, because he's got an awful lot of, what should I say, space described in the status fashion, and he can give an awful lot of it away without feeling that he's doing what I said earlier people don't want to do, giving away bits of themselves. And on the basis of this, I once, when I was in Moscow for the book programme, tried to get Brezhnev to give me an interview about what he liked reading. And my theory was that he could afford to talk to me because he was the boss and had enormous standing, and I had none because I was a private foot soldier. I mean, this all fizzles out because he didn't see it quite that way, and it didn't work. But you'll always find the boss of ICI, Unilever, Stanley Baldwin, Greta Garbo. They all come on, and they'll give you much more than the man who's actually doing the work will, but for obvious reasons.
That's why I'm touching my forelock as you speak, sir.
Sarah Harrison, Dr. Michael O'Donnell, Benny Green and Professor Laurie Taylor were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Instant Sunshine provided the musical interlude, and the programme was produced by Michael Ember.